This is the Reluctant Leader podcast, created because, through no fault of your own, you've become one. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and I know how it feels when you're getting ground down by people issues, constantly firefighting and wondering how on earth you ended up here. In each episode, I invite a guest to discuss a topic and give you 3, sometimes more, top tips that will help you in your leadership role. They are experts in the field, and you'll find out why they do what they do and what took them down that path. For more resources to help you on your leadership journey, check out thereluctantleader.academy, where you'll find details of how to join the Reluctant Leader Success Path. So let's see who's in the hot seat this week. Today I'm talking to Kate Turner. Kate is the founding director of Motivational Leadership and a leading expert in motivational maps in the UK. She combines her knowledge of motivation together with the award-winning Liberating Leadership Programme to develop high performance in teams. Kate's ambition is to change the paradigm around motivation in the workplace. She envisions a time where motivation is a natural part of everyday work conversations and enables people to quite simply love their jobs. This means a world where leaders want to be leaders, where teams strive to grow and develop, where employees want to reach their own potential, and where teams work collaboratively to inspire one another. I hope you enjoy this chat we had about vulnerability, and I'll catch you all on the other side. Kate, welcome to the Reluctant Leader podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
The reason why, well, there's many reasons why you're here, but the main reason was that you posted something on LinkedIn a while ago about the topic that we're going to be talking about, being vulnerability. And I think it's such an interesting thing because I look back on my sort of leadership career and was I ever vulnerable? Probably not. So it's a really interesting topic, which I'm really looking forward to diving into. But before we do that, the question I always ask my guests is, why do you do what you do? And what was that pivotal moment that took you down this path?
And it's a really interesting question to pose because it takes you back, doesn't it? It takes you back to your roots as to why you've started this particular journey, which I think is so important. Mm-hmm. So for me, I was working as a director in an organisation. I thought that, I'd done the hard work. I got to this position of director and, that I knew my staff. I'd done my training. I knew my employment law. I knew I felt a lot that would take me and hold me in good stead with this leadership team. Little did I know how much I'd been protected in the previous organisation, because when I went into the new organisation, I was really exposed to what bad behaviour looks like at both senior level and board level. And it was at that point where I realised that actually what really drives the ability for an organisation to perform, a team to perform, isn't necessarily the skills, it is actually the behaviour. And it was the really bad behaviour that I was seeing that I realised that this can't continue. And I brought in some people to help us, and help us they did. And I suddenly realised that's what I want to do now. I want to do what they did. I want to help teams transform, because that helps individuals transform and it helps organisations transform. So that started my journey as a leadership coach and consultant and facilitator.
Wow, excellent. And that leads nicely into what we're going to be talking about, the vulnerability topic. And I think before we get stuck into it, I reflected on my vulnerability, like I mentioned a while ago. And, I don't think I ever allowed myself to be vulnerable. I don't think that ever happened what I did was go back into my shell, which was typical for my sort of personality style. And then what came out was probably anger rather than, addressing what was going on. So I'm sure we're going to expand on all this. So if we're talking about vulnerability, where do we start? Where do you normally start when you're, introducing the topic to a client?
So it's a subject that doesn't tend to come out it's not something you'll have on a flip chart even, or on a slide that's sort of vulnerability is definition and off we go. It's something that through the work that I do with teams, it naturally emerges, because when you're working with a team, or indeed with an individual, but let's stick with teams, when you're working with a team, you'll start to notice what's getting in the way. You'll start to notice how people aren't truly showing up fully as themselves. Something's stopping them. Something is not quite enabling them to be fully present in what they're doing and contribute at their best. And it's that piece that we start to get hold of. And often the entry point is actually around trust first. So we start talking about trust and what trust is within a team. And there's some fabulous work by Patrick Lencioni and the 5 behaviours of or 5 dysfunctions of a team, as he calls it. But recognising that trust is so important. And he talks about vulnerability-based trust. So that's where the word first comes in, vulnerability-based trust. And this is about being able to put voice to, put language to, you know what, we don't have all the answers. We might be the leadership team, but we don't have all the answers.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was coming from. I think I'd put myself in a position of, well, I should know the answer. And so if I should know the answer, I'm not going to sort of let out or let anybody know that I don't have the answer. So I'll just sort of clam up, really obviously increase the stress on myself. And then ultimately that didn't get a good result, I think, eventually, which
Absolutely.
is really interesting, isn't it? And when I think typically in going, well, hopefully back in the bad old days, when it came to leadership, it wasn't something that was ever talked about. It's only in recent times that I've come across this concept, but it just makes so much sense. Completely.
It's like the thing we shall not name. It's the to use the cliche, it's the elephant in the room. I mean, people sit around a team, no matter how senior or junior they're a team. They have expectations of each other, but they're also having judgments, they think, being placed on themselves. And so in that place, you are naturally vulnerable because you want to show up well, you want to give your best. But if you're thinking there's all these judgments from others coming to you, then actually what you end up doing is you can start putting up your defenses, whether consciously or less consciously, you're putting up your defenses. And of course, if you're putting up your defenses, it's less easy to connect with other people. And therefore, we don't get the full synergy coming from teams. So you're absolutely right. And I think what teams just haven't talked about this subject. I think it really is thanks to the work of obviously Brené Brown and her work around vulnerability and shame and the fabulous viral TED talk that she did. But it's being continued with so many other people, and as I say, accessible through the work of Lencioni and others. But people are now much, much more willing to talk about vulnerability. However, what I do find, which is absolutely fine, is that I, as the external person going into a team, I'm the one who often gives voice to it first. And for me, that's about being able to give permission to the team to say, you know what, it's okay to talk at this level. In fact, it's not just okay to talk at this level, we need to talk at this level. So it's about saying to a team, and I guess what I do, and all facilitators do, is you provide the container for people to be able to express what's truly happening for them within that team, knowing that information doesn't need to go outside of that room. That this team has got your back and that there is trust emerging, and it is here where you can be vulnerable. It is here where your truth can emerge.
Right. And then the natural question would be, you've summed up a few of the reasons why, but are there any other reasons why that stops us being vulnerable? Or is there any certain things that sort of trigger or stop us from actually, saying the truth, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there's lots of things. Where to start? I think that there's certainly, if there's not the necessary level of trust in a team, then vulnerability doesn't come. And there is a bit of a chicken and egg situation with this. Which one comes first? You would think that you need trust in order to have vulnerability, but there are some studies to suggest that actually if there's a big moment of vulnerability, that builds trust quicker. But either way round, it's the layering in of those two that's important. So, if there has been a moment of vulnerability and trust gets taken away soon after that, then actually that can stop greater vulnerability. So it's like, you've got the lay of the land. We don't do vulnerability here. So that's an important one. So how is the first moment of vulnerability dealt with is the first entry point or blocker to further vulnerability. I think also what we see is, how much self-awareness is there in the team around actually what's going on for them. And if people don't have the self-awareness to know that, then of course they can't share the vulnerability, because like you described earlier, what you did, for whatever reason, whether it was conscious or less conscious, the anger would rise. It's that piece that you got put in a corner, the anger would rise. That's a really natural response, because actually we go into that flight or fight or freeze place when we're feeling this very base feeling. That's a natural place to go to. So having self-awareness about what's poking at us and what's bringing up these feelings, so that we can give voice to them appropriately rather than live out those feelings, is really important. And you can't always do that in the same moment, of course, because the adrenaline is flowing. So having self-awareness probably outside of the moment is key, and the work that you do on yourself outside is key. There's another moment that I want, or another point that I'd like to bring in here, and that's around collusion. So I see collusion a lot within teams. And what I mean by that is when somebody covers up their vulnerability, when they go to the brink of almost being vulnerable, and then for whatever reason, they bring themselves back from that point. If the other people in that team saw that moment, that glimmer of vulnerability, it triggered in them a sense of, oh, I don't want to go there. And they collude with you by moving the agenda on, or brushing over your emotions, or showering you with sympathy, which is the destructor of vulnerability. We don't want sympathy at that point, because that's judgment. If at that moment they collude with you to say vulnerability isn't what we do here, then you're not going to go forward. So there's something about being able to open the space for people to be vulnerable and to offer empathy in order for that vulnerability to come out and be appropriately handled without judgment within that team.
Yeah, I just before you said it, I've written down give space, and it's giving that. It is just giving that little bit of space to allow that next step, that almost like what might feel like that step over the precipice, if I can say it, of the cliff edge into, completely. Oh my God.
Well, that's the point, because vulnerability, let's think about what vulnerability is. Vulnerability is a feeling. Yeah. It's an unpleasant feeling. It's one that is about uncertainty. It's one that is about an emotional exposure. It's about risk, and by its very definition, then it's not comfortable. So it's outside your comfort zone. It is, some people see their comfort zone, that anything beyond it is a precipice. It is that cliff that you fall off. Actually, there is an edge before that space. There is a comfort zone and something before you get to the actual falling off stage. And that space, that point at which you go from your comfort zone to a place of discomfort that makes you think, oh, I don't want to go there. But actually, maybe deep within you, maybe I need to go there. Maybe this is what is holding me back. At that point, it's when somebody else metaphorically holds your hand into that place of stretch and holds you safely, looking at what you perceive to be the precipice before you, and says, you're not going to fall. We've got you. Just look, just see, just imagine what could happen by you sharing what you need to share at this point. At that point, you grow. Because the alternative is you go back within your comfort zone and you stay there and you stay small and you say, stay just safe, or safe as you perceive it. But actually, all that happens is that your comfort zone ultimately becomes smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and I'm just guessing we're talking about support here, aren't we? We're talking about being able to feel that there is support for us, and that we're not going into a situation where we're just going to be left to, well, I don't know where that will end up. I don't know, but we are dependent on the rest of that team to support us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So you'll know, because I know I've seen who else you've had on the podcast, and we're both very good friends of Ali Stewart and her work around liberating leadership. And one of the key principles, the key mindset actually within the liberating leadership model is high challenge, high support. And it's really funny how, I don't know if you experience this, you go into organisations and they'll say, oh yeah, we've got challenge sorted and we've got support sorted. You know, they sort of think that they've reached some sort of magical level of all-knowingness around challenge and support, and don't necessarily realise it just keeps going and keeps growing. And exactly what you're saying, in order to give the support that's needed to encourage vulnerability, you're also giving the challenge. You're also saying that in order for that person to grow into their future self, the bigger stepping up, and also for the team to succeed, you need to offer the challenge of, come on, let's go, but also the support of, you've got this, you can do this, I've seen you do this before. So it's both at the same time as challenge and support.
Yeah, in equal measure, that's exactly right, and it's something I bang on about more and more actually, because it's so important that we need to have the challenge to grow, but we also need to feel that we have the support.
Completely.
Okay, so I think the next question that springs to mind is: so how does this work on a female-male basis? Yes,
completely.
You knew that was coming, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because my experience is in working with teams where normally you've got both genders in a room, is that it is quite different. And the collusion around it is experienced differently. So, and this is a bit of a sweeping generalization, but it will make the point, because of course it's a spectrum, isn't it, of actually how people experience it, and it depends a lot on their background, their values, their behaviours, the work they've done on themselves, self-awareness, etc. But allow me to make stereotypical differences to make the point. So what we tend to see within males, and my experience of it is, well, they just don't go there. So we tend to see instead more of the ego coming up, more of the I'm okay, I'm strong, I'll just push through, I can do this, I've got the solution. And so, ultimately, and Brené Brown says this in her work, is ultimately what they're not wanting to show is weakness. And you can see that around all of the work that's been done in recent times around mental health, and particularly with regard to men, around this, man up, you can't be seen to be weak. And there's some truth in there about vulnerability too. And so they just don't have yet the role models to be able to recognize that vulnerability is strength, that vulnerability is courage, it is bravery, rather than weakness. And that's what we need to change. And I'm sure we'll come on to how we encourage vulnerability later. Mm-hmm. But for certainly for males to be thinking about where they see vulnerability in others, and actually, do they see that as weakness when they see it done? Because they probably don't. It's very unusual for people to actually see and witness others in a vulnerable place as a place of weakness. They actually will probably regard it as a place of strength if they're honest to themselves. So that's the male masculine side of things. Actually, there's the male side of things, to be correct. With women, there's a real sense of, don't let people see that I'm struggling. I've got to do it all. If you think about it, up until very recently, and thank goodness it's changing, there's a sense that, women have got to, push themselves through to be able to juggle, the household, the kids, the work, the everything, and they need to do it and still have this sort of idea of femininity around it. Thank goodness this is changing. It really is changing. I mean, it almost feels outdated saying it today because it's changing so rapidly. But there is definitely a hangover of that sense of I can't show that I'm struggling that is here, and it's that echo that we see in teams, that people think that they need to know that they can do it all, etc. And so actually it's about letting them sit in a place to show that, you know what, I am struggling. I can't do this, or I don't know how to balance all of these things and still have a life. My marriage is in a difficult place because of this, or my relationship, my kids isn't where I want it to be because of this, or I'm not treating my colleagues as well as I would like to because of this, and actually being vulnerable in that. Now, the advantage, I think, is that females, by millennia of evolution, have got more words available to them, and they tend to use them to be able to express emotion. So outside of the team, they are likely to seek counsel and to talk through things with their friends, and so will show vulnerability there. So I think there's a behaviour to be able to do it. They need to just bring it back into the workplace more. And actually just going back to guys as well, guys do it, but they do it again with their mates, where obviously there's higher trust. They'll do it in those moments with their mates. It's about bringing that back into the workplace and role modelling it for others. So it's a very different experience of what vulnerability is for males and females, but at its core, it's about recognising that vulnerability isn't weakness, and it's about fully showing up as who we are, and appropriately, so in the right audience, being able to share that. It's not sharing it with absolutely everybody, because it's not appropriate always to show your vulnerability. If you're in the beginning of a town hall meeting at work, sharing the strategy for the organisation, there are parts of your vulnerability that aren't appropriate to share at that moment, but there are parts of that same conversation you're having in your head that are definitely worth sharing with the leadership team or with your team that you're part of. So it's about choosing your audience as to where you're vulnerable as well.
So it's very, very much from what you said, it's very much linked to ego and the ability to let go of that ego. Leave it completely at the door, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a phrase I use all the time, which is leaving your ego at the door. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that whilst you're allowing your ego to be in the driving seat, whilst that ego is saying to you that, you need to look a certain way, or you need to come across in a certain way, that is all about you. It's about you. That's the point. It's about you and your supremacy, if you like, in terms of you being able to be better, be good, whatever that definition is for yourself. Mm-hmm. That is competitive. It's certainly at least in comparison to others. So there's something better than others. And that's just not helpful, because what we need when we're looking at a team working is for them to be able to not allow it to be about ourselves, oneself, but to be about we. That is obviously what teams are about, is about how can we succeed. And if there's any voice in that room about how can I succeed, it will destroy the team, and it will mean that the synergy doesn't rise through. So it's about making sure that in that team, clearly you need to have a shared remit as to what the goal is, the objectives, the outcomes that you're looking for. And you need to make sure that you're fully signed up to that. But you need to be fully signed up not only in terms of what the outcome is, but your role that you play within that. And if that means that you need to take decisions that places you in a difficult position with your own team outside of that particular group, or the work that you need to do, then so be it. Because it is about doing what is needed to be done, or how to enable the team and the organisation to succeed. It's not all about you. It's not all about you. And if you leave your ego at the door, you can hear that. You can hear people standing in that place of interdependency and working with others, rather than holding on to their ego and working from an independent place of how can I succeed, that really destroys the synergy in the team.
Mm. I've just written down another word, and that's control. And I guess when you are feeling that you are, at a point where you you probably need to be vulnerable. Whether you're actually going to do that or not is another thing. But I suppose one of the things that you're thinking about is, am I going to lose control? Firstly, of myself, and where's that going to lead me? But also lose control of my position, and what's that going to mean for me? How's that going to change people's perception of me? And that
Absolutely.
must be that must be a big thing when people are,
Oh, massively. So exactly that, because control is huge, and because with control and power, we have this presumption that, to take your second point, that in order to succeed, some people feel like they have had to elbow their way to the top, or elbow their way into that project. And, that is very much about power and control. And so if I say, I don't know how this is going to work out, or I've made a mistake, suddenly we're going to feel that we're sliding down again, and we've got that hard slog to get back to this place. It feels like it's there's a loss that comes out of showing your vulnerability. But the opposite is true. If you show your vulnerability and say, what, I've made a mistake, we've done this, that's not working, we need to find another way with it. What you actually do is you're reaching out to your colleagues to say, are you with me to be able to help what needs to be done in order for us to succeed? It's admitting it. And, what we want in teams is people to be saying the truth and have integrity around that, of where projects actually are. We don't want last minute input to say that, we're not going to make the deadline after all, and we've only got 2 weeks to reach it. We need that early days. And so we respect people much more when early on they say things have gone wrong. And that means that, yes, you might feel like you're losing control because you're going to have to ask other people to help you. But that's the point. You're part of a team. You're going to need other people to help you, because really big things aren't done just through your own efforts. They come from the combined efforts of other people as well.
Right. This is fascinating. But I think we've talked an awful lot about what causes it and all those sort of things. So I think in the last sort of 5-10 minutes we've got left, I think it's important to talk about how we can encourage more vulnerability, and obviously talk about also what comes out of that, what actually, what comes from having a healthy thing around encourage that vulnerability to come out in your team, and what that leads to. So what would you do? What's your go-to sort of strategies to bring out this and encourage the vulnerability within a team?
Yeah, I think when you're working with a team, the place to start is always from looking at trust. I mean, as I say, I've mentioned Patrick Lencioni before. I'm a complete fan of his work, and he talks about trust being the basis of team synergy and team cohesion, and then being able to reach their results. We know that piece, and I'm sure listeners know that model as well. So often that's the place that we start, is looking at trust. And so great ways to be able to look at trust and vulnerability, and as I said earlier, it's a layering in of these two areas, is things that I know we do around using things like motivational maps and insights discovery to give voice and language to who we are and what's important to us. So at a very basic level, that starts people to let them into who you are and understand the similarities and differences between people. So having that lexicon is important. So through some sort of self-awareness tool like those two I mentioned, or indeed others. So that's a place we often start. Then it's about, as I say, giving permission to the team to talk about vulnerability at the appropriate time. So, a typical way in is, what stops this team from succeeding? And through the answers that you get from that, you're going to start seeing some patterns of where things like judgment, or where people are stopping themselves. And you can start poking around in there. And as I say, I think that it is a valuable and privileged place that we have as external people to these teams to be able to name those aspects. It's not always easy when you're in the team to be able to do that, but by having an external person do that, it starts the ball rolling. In time, that role of naming what's going on actually has to fall to being within the team. Otherwise, you haven't got vulnerability there. But to start with, it certainly is helpful to have it come from outside. So that can be really useful. And I think it's also important that when you see vulnerability, when you see somebody start saying something that is them at the precipice and they need their hand holding, is that you encourage. And that can be either you as a facilitator encouraging, noticing that they're doing it and to encourage them, or to ask the team every so often within that meeting to just give credit to moments of vulnerability that they've seen within that meeting, to notice it and to basically catch people doing it right, to say, yeah, I noticed, Helen, that in this meeting what you did was, and not just that, but say, in doing that, that made me feel, or I felt this, it meant the meeting moved on. So what's the consequence of the vulnerability that they showed? I also think it's important to recognise that not all of this stuff needs to be done on complete public display amongst all of your team. If you've got, some teams these days are really quite big. The ideal size would be sort of 8-10 people, but I regularly work in teams that are slightly bigger than that, and that's an awful lot of people to share your vulnerability with if you're a newbie to it. So it's something about finding people within that audience that you can start having those conversations with, who can have your back then in the meeting, so that they're already your cheerleaders when you do speak up. So do some work outside of the room to clear the way for what you may need to go into when you're back in that room. Really important.
I'm always taking notes down because one of the things I do and I enjoy about doing these podcasts is that I'm learning at the same time as I'm sort of interviewing my guests, which is great. So I wrote down two words then. Notice. So in other words, that's about noticing others, changing behaviours, I suppose. If you encourage that and say, well, look, if you notice something, just have a word and just open up a discussion on a one-to-one basis and allow, if there is something going on, to reach out your hand and help. Yeah, I guess that's important.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
And the other word is values. So I think it's almost like encouraging vulnerability to be part of your values within the team and the organisation. Is that something?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's really vital because how often have others been into organisations where they've got values but they don't actually live and breathe them? It's so important to, yes, you've got organisational values and make sure you do live and breathe them, but bring them alive within the team. What does that mean for this team? How do we actually demonstrate that? So let me take an example of an organisation that I'm working with at the moment, and they're actually thinking about their culture, and so it links to values, and because the values get expressed in culture, and they're talking about making sure that they reduce the extent to which they're being hierarchical. They're recognising that too many decisions get made or keep getting pushed upwards basically within the organisation, and that's stopping the organisation functioning as well as it could do. And that hierarchy piece, the reason why that's happening and keeps happening within that organisation is because the senior people don't want to let go. They don't want to be vulnerable in presuming that other people within the organisation can do and get on with their role as well as, or better than they can. So it keeps reinforcing that hierarchy.
Yeah.
Which I see it all the time. I find it extraordinary, but it is very, very common. And so what we've done is, rather than just saying you need to let go, you've got this idea about hierarchy, you just need to let go. Actually, what we're doing is we're linking it back to their motivator, so using motivational maps. And that really strongly links back to values. What stops them from letting go, and what do they think is going to happen when they let go. You know, and if they've got a high director motivator, which is about control, liking to be in charge, making decisions, then they're going to have a very different relationship with that word hierarchy than somebody that, for example, has a high motivation around spirit, which is about freedom, autonomy, just being able to do things independently, or indeed friend, somebody who wants connection and belonging. Our experience of these values that the organisation have, or the wants they have in terms of culture, we all experience very differently ourselves, and it links back, and MAPS is a fabulous way to understand where you're going to find it easy and where you're going to find it difficult to embrace those values, and what you need to do as an individual to be vulnerable, actually, to try something different, because that's what's going to be the key to the success of that team or that organisation.
Yeah. And recently I saw something about values, and actually it was all about behaviours as opposed to anything else. And I suppose that's what we need to encourage, is linking our values to the behaviours that we want to see more of. And obviously we're talking about a behaviour here in vulnerability. So absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So Kate, I'm sorry to say that time is running out, and it's got to that point where we need to wrap things up. And as I pre-warned you, I'm looking for sort of 3 top tips to leave the listeners with, and hopefully you've got them sorted out. I'm sure you have. Yeah.
So I've sort of mentioned them partly as we've been going through, but to summarise them, I think that you said the word notice just now, and it is about noticing when people are being vulnerable and to catch people doing it right. We know that when people carry out a behaviour, a new behaviour that was perhaps alien to them before, and they do it, they need feedback in the moment about, that's that thing, that's that vulnerability bit, that's what we need to be seeing. Because otherwise they'll try out this behaviour of vulnerability, nobody will say anything, they'll feel uncomfortable and think, well, what was that for? Whereas what we need is to be people who caught doing it right, so that people are able in the moment to know, okay, I demonstrated vulnerability and this is the difference it made. That encourages me to do it more. So that's my first tip, is to make sure that you catch people doing it right. The second one is the leaving the ego at the door. Absolutely practice what you preach. Really think about, for yourself, be the role model around vulnerability. Leave your ego at the door so that you can go into your team and be there. Be absolutely present for your foibles and the things that get in the way of you fully showing up. And where it's relevant, and that's really important, where it's relevant, be sharing with that team, you know what, I don't know. I don't have the answers to this, or this is something that really puzzles me and I'd really like some time to kick this about with the team. So I think really leaving your ego at the door so you can get into those honest conversations and be the role model. And the third one is just recognizing that this builds up over time, and the layering in that I mentioned earlier. So do get to know your team members better. Layer in on top of that trust moments of small bits of vulnerability, asking questions around people's upbringing, that's vulnerability. Just layer in some areas of vulnerability and layer in some trust that you keep in confidence, whatever it might be. Layer in more vulnerability. So keep that practice of layering in those 2 pieces, because then when you really do need to bring out the big guns around either of those aspects, you'll have got the habit already.
Fabulous. All I can say is just thank you for highlighting such an important topic that is linked to so many things. And we've talked about mental health on this podcast several times. And if you can find ways of actually allowing people not to bottle things up, which I believe is a key thing to what leads on to poor mental health, all the better. So I think it's been fabulous.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for your time today, Kate. I know you're very busy. I hope to catch up with you very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out thereluctantleader.academy. And if you get a chance, please leave a review on whichever platform you have been listening. And also share the love by sharing the episode with someone who would benefit. Leadership is a choice. If you have the right mindset, know the process to follow, and the key skills to use at each point in the process, you have everything you need to leave a lasting legacy. Don't forget to put into action anything that has struck a chord in this episode, and until next time, be the best you can be.